Philippe, the insight data makes for quite interesting reading. I think we saw in 2014 a record year. 2015 slightly came off a little bit, but good performance in the US. Perhaps you could outline your thoughts.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's very important to report that diamond jewelry, demand for diamond jewelry was still very strong in 2015. 2014, with the total market of 81 billion, was a record year. Now, it's off a little bit by 2% down to 79 billion. So it's still a very impressive market. So we can conclude that in 15, the demand for diamond jewelry was still very strong.
And the US in particular was a highlight. It's unusual for a mature market, the largest market, to grow the strongest in any sector, and we saw that last year.
Yeah, it's really something which is unique to the diamond world. The oldest market where everything started, the most mature one, is still the biggest market growing the most. So last year, the total market for diamond jewelry in the US was 39 billion, a growth of 5%. And the share of this US market in the total world market grew from 42% to 45%. So that's very impressive. But as it is coming from the most mature, with the biggest knowledge of the diamond jewelry, I think it's quite reassuring also for 2016 and beyond, because we can rely on the huge parts of the diamond market to still grow further.
And obviously the US did well, and China too, surprisingly, I guess for some people, grew not maybe as strongly as it had in previous years, but there was still a 3% growth in China. Did that surprise you?
I think it was a bit of a surprise, but not that much. I think we need to look at the composition of the performance. At the end, China is still, or the Chinese as customers is still the second biggest market in the world. But we need to look at what has changed in the last few years and maybe going into 16. In the past, we had a pretty good and strong market, mainland China, and a lot of purchases for diamond jewelry were made in Hong Kong and Macau, and after that re-imported into China, with effectively some tourists buying outside of China. Things are changing quite rapidly, and what we saw in 15 was a departure from the past. Mainland China was a market which was around stable in dollar terms from 2014 to 2015. But because of the protests, because of the fight against corruption, the market in Hong Kong and Macau declined sharply. But this was offset by many more Chinese buying outside of mainland China and Hong Kong and Macau, mainly in Australia, in Korea, in Japan, and Europe, and mainly France. The Chinese buying abroad grew by around 30% year over year, which is a very, very big increase, and maybe around 50% in some markets like Europe or Japan. So it was a big change, a big shift. So, and at the end, despite the fact that mainland China was around stable, the Chinese market, covering all the Chinese customers, grew around 3%, which was not a very bad result at the end of the day.
No, and you mentioned Japan and the other markets, perhaps more of a mixed bag performance-wise there, mainly due to the strength of the US dollar. I think if you look at local currency, the results aren't as bad when they're translated into US dollar. Obviously, the result is weakened somewhat.
Yeah, exactly, and we always need to look at the local currency market, which in the case of Europe, in the case of Japan, was really pretty good and growing. But after that, we have to measure it in dollar terms because we are in a dollarized industry. And because of the strength of the dollar, obviously, we got a hit. If you look at the Japanese market, for example, in particular, in 2015, we saw in local currency around stability. But if you apply the exchange rate effect, it was a decrease of around 13%, which is a very big decrease. But it's also not unnoticed, if I may say so, because the Chinese tourists, when they left China to buy abroad, look at the yen and they saw it was a pretty decent exchange rate against the dollar, so it was much cheaper for them, and they went to Tokyo and bought a lot of diamond jewelry there, which was pretty good for the industry and also for the Chinese market. Maybe not that good for the Japanese market, but we need to look at the world context.
And it was interesting. Middle of last year, you know, what was happening in rough diamonds. I think there was perhaps a perception that that the sector actually overall didn't do very well. But I guess there's a big difference between rough diamond demand and consumer demand,
Yeah.
and that was quite marked in 2015.
Yeah, in 2015, we have been talking a lot about it. We went in the second part of 2015 into a little bit of a storm in the diamond world. It all started at the beginning of the year and beginning of 2015 when the selling season in the US was not as good as what we thought for many reasons. The Chinese season was also a little bit weaker, and it created at the retail level and in the midstream where the diamantaires are operating a little bit of an overstock problem. There was clearly an overhang. Because of other constraints like constraint imposed by banks and liquidity concern, in the middle of 2015, we saw Polish prices decline because there was too much stock, and we saw some, unfortunately, distressed selling of Polish diamond, and we had to go through this crisis. And obviously, De Beers, as the leader of this industry, played a key role in cutting production and also cutting supply of rough diamond to make sure that the industry was coming back into a normal balance as soon as possible. So when we were going through this destocking of polished at the retail level and with the diamantaires in the midstream, obviously the appetite for further rough purchases went down because we had to wait for this overstock to come down. At the end of 2015, most of this stock in most categories was back to normal or close to normal, with still some pocket of overstock. And as a result of it, the appetite for rough diamond to restock in the categories which had been depleted started again, and this is why we have seen for the first 3 sides of 2016 much more robust demand for rough diamond compared to the last sides of last year. So clearly the plan we put in place with our partners, obviously the site holders, as the leader of the diamond industry, work quite well, and we are now in a much more balanced position at the retail level, at the diamantaire level, and at the rough level versus what we saw in the second part of last year. And the outlook, even if we are very, very cautious, is certainly much better compared to what it was at the end of 2015.
You talk about actions that De Beers took unusually in the middle of last year. I think it was in August. Invested more money in marketing, particularly in the US and in China. Did you see an impact from that over the holiday season, and has that pulled through in the new year?
Yeah, definitely we saw an impact. Obviously, when we came with our plan to help the industry go back on its 2 feet in a normal way, we were in August. And the selling season where most diamonds are being sold in China, in the US, is at the end of the year, beginning the following year. So it was a multi-month plan. So we had to be a little bit patient. So to try to lower the stock, you need to work on 2 things. First of all, give a lot of flexibility to the pipeline so that they buy less and they buy only what they need. And obviously, you need to look at the retail level where you want to boost the demand as much as you can, so that because of extra demand, the stock is going to go down faster. We took the decision as the leader, once again, to launch 2 additional campaigns in the US and 1 additional campaign in China on top of what we were already planning at that time. A decisive investment of around $20 million, absolutely concentrated at the selling season in the US, i.e. December, the beginning of December, up leading to Christmas, and leading to the Chinese New Year in China. These 2 campaigns, these 3 campaigns, 2 in the US and 1 in China, worked very well. And we know now for sure that they had a decisive impact in increasing the demand at the end of the last year in the US and the beginning of this year, leading to Chinese New Year in China. And as a result of it, the stock went down quicker than we could have expected. So the plan worked, but we had to look at all the elements of the plan over time, from August last year till February this year, to ensure that we had ticked all the boxes and we are back to normal. I think we played a decisive role, and this is why today the pipeline is much more balanced, and the diamond industry is in a much better position to face the future. The demand is still robust. After a small decline in 2015, we are now projecting that we will have a stable market in dollar terms in 2016 as the result of the action implemented and what we see in the marketplace. So it is not a bad place to be, but we are still very, very cautious about the way we are going to supply the market in terms of rough, because we don't want to once again fall back with a little bit of an overstock position into the situation we were in 2015. So we are cautious, we are monitoring the market, and we will act accordingly.
And going back to the US, it's fascinating the continuing desire for diamonds in the US. I wonder what you attribute that to. I think back in sort of decades ago, you had Hollywood stars just wearing diamonds, which obviously established the trend. But now, just given the increased competition from other products, other luxury categories, it must surprise you that you've still got this enduring demand for diamonds.
Yeah, it's clear when you look at it for the first time and you see that the oldest market is still having 45% market share of the world market. It's unbelievable. But if we look at the present circumstances, obviously I'm not looking at 10 or 20 years from now, you have a few things which are clearly helping. First of all, we have stable or improving economic condition for many Americans. The diamond dream is still very much alive, and I think the last statistics I saw was that 87% of the couples getting engaged still offer a diamond ring, which is unbelievable, and it's not coming down. It also helped a little bit because last year we reintroduced, after around 10 years without using it, the famous slogan, "A diamond is forever," and it was extremely well received. The diamond dream was back, and it was fully alive. And the fourth thing, which is always playing a little bit for us, is we have seen in the past that election years usually are good for diamonds, because maybe people are looking at the future, looking at maybe a better environment, and are positive. And when you are positive, when things are not that bad, you want to spend some money and you want to treat yourself. And maybe a diamond is a good idea.
And the outlook in the US, you presumably think it's going to still be the main engine for growth. But how about other countries, China in particular? What's your outlook for 2016?
For 2016, our latest forecast is that in dollar terms, obviously after that we will see in local terms with the different variation of the currencies. In dollar terms, we are looking at a stable market in 16 versus 15. And we said in 15, despite the crisis, that the demand for diamond will still be robust. And it was robust, only a small decline. 16 will see stabilization. And we'll have pluses and minuses in dollar terms because of exchange rate movement, unfortunately. I think in local currency, we should see a good number of increases. If we start by the biggest market, once again, the biggest, the oldest and most mature, we see some growth there, 3-5%. It's the normal rate of increase in this marketplace, and there is no exchange rate impact in the US, obviously. So we were at 45% of the market. Potentially, we could see this number grow towards 50, not going there, but 46, 47% is not out of reach for the biggest market in the world, especially if it is an election year with a pretty decent economic environment. The second market in the world, China, should grow a little bit this year, even in dollar terms. After some bad news in terms of the Chinese economy, we are talking and hearing crash landing. No, I think it was more of a soft landing from my point of view. We see some light out of the tunnel, and the middle class is still growing heavily, despite the fact that the country is not growing as much as it was growing before. The penetration of diamond jewelry across the huge territory of mainland China is still not finished, and we still need some growth from tier 3 and tier 4 cities, which is going to be helpful. So all in all, I think that in mainland China, we should see some growth in dollar terms. We have just heard a few days ago that there will be a new import duty for goods coming from outside of China, especially diamond jewelry when they are reported in China. So should help the local market to grow because the difference in price versus the outside is going to shrink. We have seen still a lot of Chinese tourism to buy luxury goods outside of Hong Kong and Macau, i.e. Korea, Japan, Australia and Europe. Paris was hit badly after the terrorist attack, but I think it's going to come back slowly but surely. So if you add the Chinese components, i.e. mainland China, weaker Hong Kong and Macau, but stronger Chinese purchases out of China, I still believe that in dollar terms, the Chinese market of the Chinese consumers should be growing a couple of percent in 2016.
And then how about India? You talked last year in your Insight report about the future growth of the Indian market, the boom of the middle class. Obviously a bit of a mixed performance in 2015, but you're still as convinced in the long-term fundamentals in India as you were?
The long-term fundamentals are there. The problem is, the famous question is, when are we going to see this market materializing? India has always been a very big market for diamond jewelry, more gold jewelry than diamond jewelry, but it has always been a market for diamond jewelry. Because of subdued growth in the economy, because of changes in the credit, in tax, and so on and so forth. Yes, we saw a little bit of a softening of this marketplace. There is a new excise duty, for example, on diamond jewelry, which has been voted for the budget just a few weeks ago. All of this didn't help and created a little bit of uncertainty in the jewelry market and certainly in the diamond jewelry market in India. But fundamentally, it's a huge market. The middle class is growing, and the desire for jewelry is part of the DNA of the Indians. And clearly, the potential is there. The problem is the famous question, when are we going to see it growing? India has the potential one day to be as big as China, but it seems that we push the starting date from growth from one year to the other, and if you look in rupee terms, it is not that bad, but if you look in dollar terms, because of the exchange rate problem with the dollar, we see a decrease. So I'm dreaming of a year when we are going to see India rise in dollar terms. Let's hope we will see that in the second part of 2016 when we start the wedding season and Diwali. Let's hope so. But we still have to see it materializing, unfortunately. But I have big hopes in India.
And finally, the big question around millennials and whether they're still buying diamond jewelry, whether they're not, whether they're being influenced by different factors, increased competition from other products, as we've talked about. Do you see millennials still having a desire for diamonds in the way their parents have done?
Definitely, yes. We have done a lot of studies. We are working on new ones. Definitely, millennials like diamond. We are part of their share of wallet. So they are looking at diamonds as they can look at other luxury goods. But it's not only down to millennials. I think anybody now can look at luxury good, and even if you are not a millennial and you have money, you could potentially hesitate between a very nice and expensive leather bag and a piece of diamond jewelry. Why not? We have a unique problem with the millennial is that we need to be relevant to them. And it is now very well understood that we cannot communicate, we cannot advertise, we cannot have a relationship with this customer the way we were having the relationship with older customers or their parents or even 10 or 15 years ago when social networks and all these new media were not as powerful as they are today. So we are relevant, but we need to deliver the message in a way which is totally and fully relevant to the millennials themselves. and it has to be a dedicated communication. So we are very present with, let's say, traditional advertising, but we're also making a huge effort, and we do that for Forevermark, we do that for De Beers Diamond Jewellery, with the social network, digital advertising, to aim at this type of customers. And I am absolutely convinced that if we have the right way of addressing their desire, we will get their purchases and their share of wallet. So I am quite optimistic, but we have to adapt.